All right, well, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt Siegel. I'm the interim program chair of the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program and an associate professor in this program. I'm thrilled to be welcoming you to this dissertation defense of Max DeArmon. Today will be part ritual and part armed conflict. No, I'm just kidding. But there is a serious rigorous scholarly examination that will be taking place today. And I will just say that, our program has been around for more than 30 years to try to convene and incubate a space for scholars like Max and many others over that more than 3 decades of time to really try to usher in a new worldview and do nothing less than transform the human being to become a member of this earth community that can contribute back to the flourishing of life and to enrich the cosmic celebration that we're all invited to. And I think that we will see an example of that type of scholarship that's not just contributing knowledge, but helping our species evolve today from Max. So with that, I'll turn it over to the chair of Max's dissertation committee, Professor Sean Kelly.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Max. And thank you all for being here. Yes, Sean Kelly, I've been here for almost 30 years. Um, Now, I guess there's not much I need to say about the dissertation defense, only just to remind you that it's an 800-year-old tradition, roughly speaking, that we are weaving we are weaving ourselves in this moment into an 800-year initiatory process, and it is an initiation. Unlike traditional rites of passage where there is a literal near-death experience, today won't, or at least the possibility of a literal near-death experience, today won't involve that for the main reason that the committee has already seen the dissertation come to a point where we are confident enough that Max will survive today's initiation. Right? So, but it's not just a mere formality either, because things can happen during a defense. Issues can arise that weren't obvious through simply reading the text and being in dialogue with its author over its composition. And then there's the defense, which traditionally was a real defense, defending against aggressive attacks at the integrity of the arguments. Our culture is not quite so polemical. It's certainly not aggressive. It's sympathetic, but it is still serious, a serious engagement with the claims of the dissertation in order to allow the candidate, in this case, Max DeArmon, to demonstrate whether or not he is in fact worthy of being a doctor. And a doctor is someone who is qualified by other doctors to teach and to present themselves as an authority in their chosen field. And in this case, the field is really broad: philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. And I'll just say one more thing that Max, yeah, well, we'll see in the dissertation. You'll see to what extent Max is an exemplar of what we're trying to do, in my opinion, here in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, in terms of both breadth and devoting research to the project that that Matt outlined in his opening remarks. Let me just introduce the other two members of the committee. First of all, the second member, and I'm going to read because it's too distinguished here. Brian Thomas Swim. I could try to do it all on my own, but so Brian is Professor Emeritus here at the California Institute of Integral Studies and Director of the Center for the Story of the Universe. He's the author of The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, The Universe is a Green Dragon, and co-author with Thomas Berry of The Universe Story. Brian is also the creator of educational video series, including Canticle to the Cosmos, The Earth's Imagination, Powers of the Universe. He also co-wrote and hosted a 60-minute award-winning documentary, Journey of the Universe, with Mary Evelyn Tucker. Most recently, Brian published Cosmogenesis, an unveiling of the expanding universe, which is an example of autocosmology, as he calls it, which weaves together contemporary science and cosmological phenomenology to reveal the deeper structure and significance of an autobiography. If that wasn't enough, Brian is also the director of the third story of the universe at Human Energy, a public benefit nonprofit that focuses on scientific and interdisciplinary research on the future of human collective consciousness. His most recent media work is the 35-part video series, The Story of the Noosphere, created with Devin O'Day and Monica de Rasbolas. His most recent book, written with Monica, another PCC alum, is companion to the series with the same title, The Story of the Noosphere. So thank you, Brian, for being here and for your service on this committee. The external examiner is Dr. William Keepen, a longtime friend of CIS and PCC. Will got his PhD in physics, a mathematical physicist with extensive training in contemplative meditation and transpersonal psychology after his training in physics. His research on sustainable energy to mitigate climate change influenced international environmental policy, and he was a whistleblower in nuclear science policy and instrumental actually in shifting the direction of environmental policy, energy policy in this country and globally, really. Will co-founded Gender Equity and Reconciliation International, which has conducted 300 trainings in 14 countries on gender equality, and also Satyana Institute, which organizes conferences to bring contemplative mystics together across the religions and science. And I would add that Max did training in the program with Will and Cynthia on gender equity. Will's books include Belonging to God, Science, Spirituality, and a Universal Path of Divine Love, and Gender Equity and Reconciliation, 30 Years of Healing the Most Ancient Wound in the Human Family. And there's so much more that could be said about Will and indeed Brian, but that gives you a taste of how lucky I feel to have served on this committee with them on behalf of Max. And so the way we're going to proceed is Max is going to present the fruits, the main structure and the fruits of his dissertation for around 40 minutes. And then we, the committee, will engage him in dialogue, testing his command of the material. And then the committee will retire to determine how well Max did and whether or not, as a result of the defense, any revisions are necessary for the dissertation. And we'll come up with a judgment. And the judgment could be not likely, but it's possible. Well, we now see that it just can't pass. So failure, but theoretically possible. Second option is that we're happy to pass the dissertation with major revisions. Third possibility is pass the dissertation with minor revisions. That could include just typos and so on. That's basically it. Or it could be pass with absolutely no revisions. That's also a theoretical possibility. So with that, I turn it over to you, Max.
Well, thank you, Sean. And I know you read everyone's bio, but I also want to just say that Sean is a very distinguished author and professor and wise elder. And so grateful to have you and Will and Brian on my committee. And thanks to Matt and V for hosting this. And it's so beautiful to see so many of my friends and family and colleagues and great teachers here. And I'm very honored by your presence. So thank you for being here. Let's just take one moment of silence to center ourselves before we dive into this very deep and rich exploration of the cosmos. So the world seems more divided than ever right now. Lines are being drawn between political parties and religions. Feuds over immigration, political parties, sorry, feuds over immigration, gender, and race are at a fever pitch, and nations are preparing for a decade of conflict and war. I think that group identities are important to distinguish the lived experiences of different groups, and that each group has the right to self-determination. Nevertheless, behind our differences is our shared humanity. And behind our humanity, we are part of one Earth community, which includes all the living beings in the biosphere. And to an even greater extent, we are part of the same universe. While there are many important reasons to identify our differences, our distinct traumas and triumphs of history, behind it all, we are part of one planet in one universe. So today, I'm going to be talking about the cosmological self and its evolution towards a planetary consciousness. To be clear, the cosmological self is not something that I invented. It is something that can be observed in the collective by anyone who investigates the paradigmatic changes that have occurred over the 20th century. As Sean said, my lecture will take about 40 minutes, give or take, and it will be followed by questions from the committee and then questions from you all. My dissertation covers a wide range of topics that are relevant to a cosmological self-identity. In chapter 1, which is called The Dawning of Self-Knowledge, I present evidence for early signs of self-reflective consciousness and explore systems of thought from the ancient world about the nature of the self. One of the earliest known literary accounts of self-reflection comes from Enheduanna, the Akkadian high priestess of the Moon Temple in the city of Ur in ancient Sumer. Over 4,000 years ago, Enheduanna gave us a diary-like narrative in which she shared her inner experience of being kidnapped and sexually assaulted in the most heinous way. Her written account represents a pivotal moment in the evolution of consciousness. According to Wolfgang Leithold, the complete turn to self-reflection came over 3,000 years ago from the Iranian prophet Zarathustra, who wrote down his revelations in the Gathas and declared his self-agency, creating the world's first known spiritual practice of introspection. Self-knowledge and self-cultivation were essential to the I Ching and further developments in Taoist and Confucian thought. Self-cultivation included an interpersonal self-awareness that reached beyond the individual to include one's biological family, their local community, their national identity, and a connection with all people under heaven. From the perspective of Vedanta and the teachings of the Upanishad, quote, "The self in man and in the sun are one. Those who understand this see through the world and go beyond the various sheaths of being to realize the unity of life. Those who realize that all life is one are at home everywhere and see themselves in all beings." The Zulu proverb, "I am because you are, we are because you are," still permeates the culture in South Africa, as it recognizes a self to be a network of relationships. This phrase is more commonly known as Ubuntu. The self, as a network of relationships, according to James Ogude, goes beyond the interconnection of humans to include the relationships of all beings and even the whole cosmos. Before the conquest of the Americas, there were over 500 indigenous tribes spread across the Western Hemisphere that had established spiritual, cosmological, and philosophical beliefs about who they were in relation to the Creator, the Earth, and the cosmos. The tribes, such as the Maya, the Hopi, Mexica, Inca, Quechua, Haudenosaunee, and the Ocheti, Sakowin, Seven Fires tribes of the Great Plains, among others, understood themselves as distinct from one another. But after colonization, they appeared to have more in common than previously thought. The Apache philosopher Viola F. Cordova established that indigenous American philosophy can be identified as having a shared worldview in the same way we can identify a uniquely Western worldview stemming from many places in Europe. Cordova states that from an indigenous perspective, the human requires an enlarged sense of self that includes their family, their clan, their tribe, the place that they're from, along with the earth and the cosmos. There is also evidence that human beings all around the planet have aligned themselves with the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars since the beginning of time. The pursuit of cosmic self-awareness can be seen in ancient Egypt, Babylonia, China, India, Greece, and with the Maya and many other cultures who sought to decipher the language of the stars. According to Anthony Aveni, the belief in astrology seemed to be universal, and it was evident in every aspect of society. The analytical psychologist Carl Gustav Jung once stated that the value of astrology was obvious enough to the psychologist, since astrology represents the sum of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. These examples of self-knowledge from the ancient world, and there are others I cite in my dissertation, help to broaden our imagination to the possibilities of an expanded identity of a cosmological self. The Western sense of self is evolving to a place where our beliefs about identity are moving beyond what Alan Watts called the skin-encapsulated ego to include the interpersonal, ecological, and transpersonal dimensions of the self. The next phase of this evolution, I think, appears to be the movement towards a cosmological self-identity, which reconnects the individual self to a greater cosmological story in a participatory manner. The modern sense of self and the modern worldview can be defined by two central ideas. One, the individual is a buffered self that is disconnected from the earth and the universe. And two, the universe is made of material objects that lack interiority. Some scholars have noticed an evolution of consciousness in the West, where the understanding of the self has changed over the centuries, increasingly moving inward towards individual autonomy and isolation. However, in the words of Sean Kelly, the Western mind has been caught up in an extended birthing of a new identity, and psychologists such as Carl Jung and James Hillman have suggested that the Western world is in the process of seeking a reconnection with its soul. In Chapter 2, called Beyond the Individual Self, I outline developments in the evolution of consciousness that extend the boundaries of the self to wider circles of influence. While Freud emphasized the internal struggle of the id and the ego, other psychoanalysts quickly realized that they couldn't separate their patients from the environment and their relationships. Melanie Klein and others developed a theoretical model called object relations theory that focused on the mother-child relationship as central to personal development. Since some psychoanalysts found the term object relations to be problematic, Harry Stack Sullivan developed the term interpersonal psychoanalysis to describe the interactions between two or more people. This perspective shifts the dynamic between two people from an I-it relationship to what Martin Buber called an I-thou relationship. The theory was further developed by John Bowlby and others as researchers found that it was not only the relationship between the child and the primary parent that forged the individual's self-identity, but it also was other relationships that shaped one's attachment style and how one relates to the world. In addition, there is epigenetic research that supports the notion that intergenerational transmission of trauma can affect the psychological moods of future generations. In one such study, Rachel Yehuda found that the offspring of Holocaust survivors who had not directly experienced the Holocaust themselves showed genetic markers associated with greater risk of post-traumatic stress disorder and mood and anxiety disorders. In addition, Joy DeGruy suggested that the intergenerational trauma of Black Americans experience from the legacy of slavery and the subsequent Jim Crow era affects people living today. Trauma is not only a psychological state, it also affects a person's development and self-identity. The psychoanalytic method of Gestalt therapy expanded the circle of influence even further, suggesting that individuals are nested in their environment. As Fritz Perls once said, no organism is self-sufficient. Let me repeat, no organism is self-sufficient. Daniel Siegel states that research from the field of interpersonal neurobiology supports the notion that the self is not strictly an internal process. Siegel's definition of the mind places the mind in two locations, both in the brain and body and in the relationship between other people and the larger environment. Since the mind is deeply connected to how the self is constructed, this extends one's self-identity to include their relationships with other people, the earth, and the cosmos. Cognitive psychologists have observed that humans are inherently meaning-making creatures, and having a self-narrative is central to our identity. To quote Charles Taylor, we grasp our lives in a narrative. We grasp our lives in a narrative. While Freud created hard edges around the self-identifying nature of the personal ego, the field of eco-psychology argued for a permeable self with soft edges that is connected to nature. Theodore Roszak believed that aside from the child-parent relationship, the biosphere is the primary caregiver to all living beings in the largest environment in which we are in relationship. In 1987, Arno Ness proposed that the concept of an ecological self to describe the individual's primary relationship with the earth. Joanna Macy suggested that Ness's concept of an ecological self replace the individualistic self of modernity with a wider self-identity, reconnecting the individual to the rest of the life on the planet. Laura Sewall believed that with this new understanding of our relationship to the earth, we are being called upon to develop an ecological consciousness. Sewall thought that expanding our self-identity towards an ecological self is a natural process of maturation in which people in modern societies are more self-aware of the interdependence of life on Earth. Janine Canty, who happens to be in the audience, bless you, Janine, agrees with Roszak that the ecological self broadens our identity to encompass nature. As our self-identification with ego consciousness shifts to include an identification with the larger self of the earth. The ability to shift one's sense of identity is not just the wishful thinking of environmentalists. Contemporary neurobiological research now supports the idea. Daniel Siegel refers to this process as the capacity to shift one's identity lens from a narrowing focus on the individual self to an expanded, wide-angle perspective of the larger, intra-connected self-identity of the whole. Siegel believes that how we define our identity defines our belonging. So, this brings us to my thesis that the next expansion of self-identity includes the entire cosmos, as the cosmos is the largest environment in which the individual self is in relationship. While esoteric and spiritual traditions of the ancient world understood the self to be a microcosm of the macrocosm, scientific breakthroughs in the 20th and 21st centuries have presented supporting evidence for a cosmological self-identity. In the same way that ideas of the self have gone through an evolution in the last 150 years, Western cosmology is also in the process of being revisioned. As Thomas Berry observed, we need a new story. He thought that the old story, the account of the world and humanity's place within it, was no longer effective. And some would say that the chaos we're experiencing in the world today is partially caused by the lack of a coherent cosmological narrative. Since the 1990s, the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness graduate program at CIIS, otherwise known as PCC, has been an intellectual hub for revisioning cosmology. To quote the words of Richard Tarnas, no amount of revisioning philosophy or psychology, science or religion can forge a new worldview without a radical shift at the cosmological level. PCC has been the intellectual home of both the evolutionary cosmology of Teilhard de Chardin, Thomas Berry, and Brian Swimme, and the archetypal cosmology of Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas. Archetypal cosmology is part of the depth psychological tradition, drawing on the foundational work of Freud, Jung, Joseph Campbell, James Hillman, Liz Green, the Platonic tradition, and others. The cosmology of a civilization, according to Tarnas, quote, both reflects and influences all human activity, motivation, and self-understanding that take place within its parameters. It is the container for everything else. The ancient Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, Iranians, Chinese, Greeks, and the Yoruba tradition in West Africa, along with the pre-colonial North, Central, and South American indigenous tribes, such as the Maya and Hopi, among others, all had astronomically informed cosmological systems that situated the human in a larger cosmic story. Ancient Chinese cosmology saw the entire universe, including the human, as part of one organism, which led to their constant observation of the skies. Faithkeeper Oren Lyons states that the Haudenosaunee cosmology begins in the sky world. He believes that all indigenous people have cosmologies and all peoples have cosmologies, and that these are amazing stories of how we come to be. Annette Williams, who also happens to be here, blessing us with her grace, states that the Yoruba cosmology and ontological orientation to the world is contained in the Odu Ifa. The Ifa includes moral and ethical teachings, spiritual guidance, oral history, the stories of the Orisha deities that permeate the cosmos and their interactions with humans, and the answers to the mysteries of birth, death, and life. Ancient cosmologies were a mix of astronomical observations and mythical and spiritual symbolism, and according to Joel Primack and Nancy Ellen Abrams, traditional cultures' cosmologies, although they weren't scientifically factual, they offered guidance about how to live with a sense of belonging in the world. Modern Western cosmology has mapped the material universe with great precision, elucidating astronomical knowledge with vivid images from space telescopes, providing grand models supported by theoretical physics, yet it falls short of situating the human within the cosmological narrative with a sense of belonging. While scientific cosmology has awakened us to an evolving universe, it has also, according to Tarnas, been accompanied by a great loss of the sacred, moral, spiritual, and aesthetic dimensions of the cosmos. After all the interior dimensions of reality have been regulated to the human mind. So, what is the new story that is emerging in the West? The new cosmology, simply put, sees the evolution of the universe the evolution of life and the evolution of humanity as one continuous process. Even the manifestations of the human mind and everything we have created is at the most fundamental level an extension of cosmic creativity. The big revelation, according to Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry, is that we are part of a cosmogenesis, a self-regulating, self-generating, ongoing journey of the universe. And when we look up at the glittering stars in the sky, we are essentially the universe looking back at itself with cosmic self-awareness. Although this continuity of evolution is now accepted by mainstream cosmologists, materialistic scientists do not accept the notion that the interiority of the human is in any way connected to some type of cosmic interiority. Teilhard de Chardin was one of the first scientists to posit that since there is a continuity of the exterior dimensions of reality, there must also be a continuity of the interiority. Otherwise, as Berry puts it, human consciousness emerges out of nowhere. If we can agree that humans emerged out of cosmic evolution, it seems logical to me to conclude that the full spectrum of inner experience is also a manifestation of the interiority of the cosmos. Now, some highly respected philosophers in the West have suggested that consciousness is an illusion, and some neurobiologists have concluded that consciousness is simply a byproduct of the neurophysiology of the brain. Others have suggested that consciousness is a hard problem that we just can't figure out. But contrary to this belief, according to the neurobiological research of Edward Kelly, there have been major advancements in cognitive science in the second half of the 20th century that have expanded our understanding of consciousness. For example, aside from our normal waking state, researchers have mapped 4 additional states of consciousness in sleep studies. These are considered naturally induced altered states of consciousness. In groundbreaking laboratory research from the neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp has shed light on the neuroevolutionary origins of human emotions. He identified the core, mostly unconscious, primary experiences that all mammals have in common, and these emotions correlate to the subcortical areas of the brainstem. They classify these emotions as seeking, fear, rage, lust, care, panic/grief, and play. In short, they found that these core emotional affects exist in other animals and they correspond to emotions that humans experience. Additionally, Panksepp and the neuropsychologist Mark Solms have produced scientific research that suggests that the subcortical brainstem structures generate primary consciousness, or what they are calling the core quality of subjective being. As Solms and Panksepp state, to put it bluntly, consciousness is generated in the id. They make it clear that contrary to the scientific dismissal of Freud's theories, his assertion was right after all, that the unconscious processes of the id are a fundamental aspect of our being. While evolutionary cosmology has provided a cohesive, grand cosmic narrative of the journey of the universe, archetypal cosmology has formulated a grand narrative for the archetypal dynamics of the interiority of the human psyche and its relationship to the anima mundi, the soul of the world. In chapter 4, called The Expanding Map of Inner Space, I outline the history of the psychological investigation into the nature of the unconscious. Although the process was centuries in the making, with major contributions from great thinkers, the ideas culminated with Freud's map of the psyche in his analysis of the personal unconscious. The work of Carl Jung extended the map to include what he called the collective unconscious, which contained archetypal motifs and images that are universal and timeless. I think it's important to note here that Jung's body of work was developed in collaboration with several women, primarily with Toni Wolff and Marie-Louise von Franz. While others made contributions to the expanding map of the psyche, the next major expansion came from Stanislav Grof. Based on over 14 years of clinical research with LSD-assisted psychotherapy, Grof developed a three-tiered system of the realms of the human unconscious that included the biographical, perinatal, and transpersonal domains of the psyche. After decades of contemplating the data, Grof stated that he believed the archetypes were cosmic primordial patterns and governing principles that were universal templates for their particular manifestations. While Grof's research produced supporting evidence for Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and the archetypal dynamics of the psyche, he still could not explain the variety of psychedelic experiences that his patients were having, as they did not fit the normal pharmacological patterns. After exhausting all psychological methods without success, Grof and Tarnas reluctantly attempted to map the archetypal experiences of the patient's sessions with the research of planetary transit astrology. After analyzing thousands of specific observations, to their surprise and disbelief, the only psychological method that could track the variabilities of psychedelic experiences was the analysis of planetary archetypes and their dynamics. After decades of analysis, Grof was convinced that they had uncovered the Rosetta Stone of the human psyche. At the dawn of the 20th century, it was William James, after all, who called for a psychology of the future that included not only the study of normal waking states of consciousness, but also of all transmarginal states of consciousness. His investigation into consciousness beyond the margins led him to the conclusion that, quote, there is a continuum of cosmic consciousness. And this is William James, okay, the great American psychologist. He's saying that there is a continuum of cosmic consciousness against which our individuality builds but accidental fences. After his initial resistance to the idea of planetary archetypes, the mathematical physicist William Keepan came to the conclusion that the Grof-Tarnas empirical research in no way contradicted the facts of science. Keepan, drawing on the work of David Bohm, stated that the reason we can find correlations between human consciousness and planetary archetypes is not because the planets are affecting the human psyche in a causal way, but rather because, quote, consciousness radically supersedes the physical distance of the planets as it operates as an acausal, fractal, non-local oneness across all levels of interbeing. So, we've covered a lot of ground regarding the interior and exterior dimensions of the self and the cosmos. The key recap is that there is an evolution of consciousness happening in the West, in which our understanding of the self is widening to include the greater environments of the living system of Earth, the evolving universe, and the interior dynamics of the archetypes of the collective unconscious. There is also a recognition that we humans have emerged out of a self-generating cosmogenesis, and that our awareness, imagination, and creativity is also an extension of the cosmos. Before I wrap up this presentation, I would like to briefly cover two more paradigmatic shifts of the 20th century. One, we now have scientific evidence that supports the notion that the human is part of the living system of Earth and is radically interconnected and interdependent with the health and well-being of the entire biosphere. And two, the next phase of evolution that has emerged after the development of the biosphere is what Teilhard de Chardin has called the noosphere, which is the thinking layer of the Earth that is now surrounding the entire planet. For centuries, the modern mind thought that we humans exist on the Earth and that somehow we were in opposition to nature. It is still common to hear people say that we are on the third rock from the sun, floating through endless space, or that we are on spaceship Earth, which gives the impression that we are passengers on this planet. Scientific research from the second half of the 20th century has supplied ample evidence that these outdated notions could not be further from the truth. To quote the great evolutionary biologist Lynn Margulis, science now knows that we are embedded in a single system of life that is both continuous through time and through space. The field of astrobiology confirms this assertion, as the building blocks for life are found in every living organism on Earth and on other planets and celestial bodies in space. In addition, all of the elements found on Earth have cosmic origins. As of 2022, the Human Genome Project was finally completed, confirming that all living beings are related. It seems that the ancient Lakota prayer of Mitakuyasin, meaning we are all related, is not only a spiritual notion about the interconnection of life, but now it is also a fundamental biological reality. With great painstaking effort, Margulis's endosymbiotic theory was finally accepted by mainstream biology as a credible explanation for the origin of the first eukaryotic cells, and astrobiologists have stated that there is substantial evidence to support this theory. To put it plainly, her research asserts that species have co-evolved in a symbiotic relationship since the beginning of life. For example, humans have a symbiotic relationship with gut bacteria that is billions of years old, and there are more bacterial cells in the human body than human cells. Without our relationship to gut bacteria, we could not survive. Margulis jokingly says that we humans would rather enjoy a silent, unconscious relationship with microbes than to think about how we live together. Margulis and James Lovelock and others also uncovered that all of the organisms in the biosphere act as one living system of Earth that includes the lower atmosphere. What they concluded was that the atmosphere is not simply a container, but that the chemical makeup of the atmosphere is modulated by life in the biosphere. Therefore, if we continue to destroy the ecosystems of the planet, we are destroying the ability for humans and other life forms to exist. While Lovelock and Margulis originally called their theory the Gaia hypothesis, what they were really describing was the geophysiology of the Earth. Contemporary educational models are now using the term Earth system science to teach about the ways in which all of the seemingly different aspects of Earth work together in a coherent whole. It is now clear, more than ever, that life, the Earth, and the cosmos have co-evolved through time in an intricate dance. There is no hard line between heaven and earth as once thought, and there is no separation of the human from the rest of life. We are embedded in the material universe, and we are nodes of consciousness, experiencing and witnessing this grand cosmic drama. While the cosmological self is embedded in a living earth and an evolving cosmos, and deeply connected with the collective unconscious, it is also participating in the formation of a planetary mind. The idea of a planetary mind, the noosphere, was originally put forth by the paleontologist and Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin in 1927, long before the internet was invented, before anyone on Earth had a smartphone and social media, and long before the impending AI revolution that experts warn is going to be, quote, the biggest event in human history. A quick side note, as Sean mentioned, if you're curious to learn more about the noosphere, Brian Swim has an amazing series on YouTube called The Story of the Noosphere, which is a deep and rich account of these major themes. And it was a major inspiration for my chapter called The Formation of a Planetary Mind. Because humans are an extension of the biosphere, and the biosphere is an extension of the cosmos, the human mind is also an extension of life and the universe. What is happening now is that all human minds on Earth are converging through the help of telecommunications, satellites, and the accumulation of knowledge now readily available to most people online. This process is coalescing in the emergence of large language models such as ChatGPT and other AI models that give each individual access to a planetary mind. However, more information does not necessarily equate to an increase in intelligence, according to Yuval Noah Harari. And information networks are used differently in countries with authoritarian governments versus those that aspire to democratic ideals, personal freedom, and the freedom of speech. Because our current planetary mind seems to me to be on a crash course towards potential disaster, I propose that what we are witnessing on the world stage is mostly the emergence of an unconscious planetary mind. And this leads to the final chapter of my dissertation. If one looks with a keen eye, you can begin to see glimmers of a planetary consciousness emerging in the collective. Sean Kelly believes that a planetary wisdom culture is the next stage of the evolution of consciousness. And although it is hard to imagine these days, with all the violence, division, and turmoil seeping through the headlines, my research shows that there are small pockets of communities that are carrying the torch for a future planetary civilization that recognizes our deep interdependence with the Earth, with each other, and with the cosmos. A few examples of communities that represent a planetary consciousness are the Bioneers Organization, the Work That Reconnects, the Interfaith Movement, and Gender Equity and Reconciliation International. Kelly believes that these types of communities represent the first light before the dawn of a planetary consciousness. To conclude, with all of these different macro scale systems I have covered here today, the biosphere, the noosphere, the collective unconscious, the evolution of consciousness, and cosmogenesis, it might seem easy to lose sight of the individual and our personal choice and participation in the larger whole. With self-knowledge and self-awareness of these larger systems, we can participate more freely in our own self-cultivation with greater precision. With an expanded self-awareness that includes a planetary consciousness, the individual self can align with the collective currents flowing through the cosmos. For the most part, the journey of planetization has been an unconscious evolutionary process with many clashes, great strife, and so much unnecessary suffering. With a widening definition of self-identity, an expanded self-awareness, and a deepening of self-knowledge through the revelations of evolutionary and archetypal cosmologies and the crucial recognition of the living system of Earth, the cosmological self has the potential to awaken to a planetary consciousness within. The individuation of the unique self is a fundamental characteristic of a cosmological self. As Teilhard eloquently stated, what is the work of the human if it is not for each one of us to establish in ourselves an original center where the universe is reflected in a unique way. Let me repeat. What is the work of the human if it is not for each one of us to establish in ourselves an original center where the universe is reflected in a unique way? A planetary consciousness inherently requires a participatory cosmology, which recognizes the sovereignty of individuals and different groups and their role in co-creating our world. At the same time, a participatory cosmology recognizes that the world is full of other entities imbued with interior realities. This recursive relationship of subject-subject, I-thou relational dynamics awakens the mind and opens the heart and could potentially offer another way of cohabitating the living system of Earth. Great visionaries and thinkers of the 20th century have called for a new story and a new worldview for our planet. With our new understanding of reality, answering the question, who am I, produces radically different results in the new millennium than in centuries past. If we choose to align our self-narratives with our evolving understanding of the phenomenal world, the cosmological self, in my opinion, offers a new identity for a new worldview. To reiterate, I did not invent the idea of a cosmological self. I am trying to articulate something that can be seen across many disciplines and thought communities. And its evolutionary movement towards a planetary consciousness is part of a long, laborious, intergenerational history. And still, because each one of us is imbued with the freedom of choice, aligning oneself with this grand cosmic drama is ultimately an act of freedom and a personal choice. And that choice is always for each and every one of us to make. Thank you for listening. I look forward to talking with each of you about these ideas. I'll now turn it over to my committee. Sean.
Thank you, Max. I hope you can, Zoom doesn't allow it technically, but I hope you can hear the massive applause that is surely trying to push its way through the airwaves. Wow. I'm getting similar feelings that I had while reading the chapters as they came out and speaking with you about your wonderful dissertation. Let me just say that one thing that is so beautiful is that the way in which the dissertation and you as a person, the dissertation is a wonderfully authentic mirror of you as a person, as far as one can know the mystery of another person. And that mirroring is also a mirror of the worldview that you are arguing for, in that the process of writing this dissertation, from my perspective, watching you do it and reading it, it is such an enaction of the participatory relational dynamics that you are championing, evident in the way that the way that you have so carefully and beautifully drawn from the ancestors, from your living community, from all of your relations. So, it's you and who you are as you argue in your dissertation. Your dissertation shows how you are not other than all of your relations. You are sort of all of those added, plus one, as Whitehead says. I mean, the many coming together and being increased by one. So I just wanted to say that, how remarkable the dissertation is from that point of view particularly, and just the sheer, the sheer breadth, number of, I don't know how you could possibly have read so much and drawn so skillfully from all of these sources. So I just wanted to say that initially, how grateful I am to have been to have served on this committee with you, Max, and
Thank,
how impressed I am.
thank you, Sean.
And now the daggers come out. Just kidding.
Bring it on. Let's go.
No, no. But I do have some questions, and I guess I could kick it off. I'll just ask one question. I have three that I could ask, but the first one, so on the one hand, you present such a coherent and beautiful um, dialogue between a community of people, and you show the coherence of the conversation. What I would like to hear you say a little bit more about is how do you see your voice? Like what has your voice done specifically in the birthing of this new story, this new worldview, this emergence of the idea of a cosmological self and a movement toward a planetary consciousness? What is like distinctive, original, or what is your, how do you see your particular edge that what you have accomplished in this document?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Well, first off, the key to this is I'm drawing on two cosmological systems. I'm drawing on evolutionary cosmology from Brian, Barry, and Teilhard, and I'm drawing on archetypal cosmology from Rick and Stan and Hillman, etc. And originally, I was trying to figure out how to bring those two systems into a coherent system, but I quickly realized that they could not be conflated and that the intersection of these two systems is the self. That as that was one of my one of the things that I tried to do was keep all the languaging and the research based in phenomenal reality. Like, how am I experiencing reality, not just hypothetical abstractions? And so I know from both of those systems that I do experience both of those realities. And, you could plainly say, it's not really true, but you could plainly say that archetypal cosmology focuses on the interiority and that evolutionary cosmology focuses more on the exteriority. But that breaks down pretty quickly. Um, and they meet somewhere in the middle. I mean, Rick has a quote somewhere where he says that evolutionary cosmology and archetypal cosmology represent the two poles of PCC moving towards each other. And I felt like the self was the intersection of those two realities moving towards each other. And so that, from what I understand, I'm not sure anyone else has done, Kieran brought the two into dialogue, but I'm not sure that anyone else has brought those two into discussion in the way I have. The other thing is I'm bringing in this notion of the self. I could have called it anything, but the self is a philosophical notion that has been debated for centuries. And you learn about this in Western philosophy 101, Descartes and Locke, and all these notions of what the self is. And so I'm using the self, and chapter one lays out the ancient ideas, but then chapter two is kind of discussing how the self is created by a narrative, and that this whole philosophical lineage of exploring what the self is, it really is another thing that I'm bringing into the discussion of these larger cosmological narratives. In addition to that, what I felt like I was doing, and I'm open to anyone's disagreement here. What I attempted to do was I felt like Brian and Rick gave me the narrative, the inspiration to go deeper, and then I tried to bring in as much scientific research to support those narratives that I could. And I did that extensively. And I brought in a lot of hard science to back up these philosophical notions so that we're not just drifting off in abstractions, but it's grounded in hard science. And some people might say, who cares? But to me, that matters. I wanted to see some real proof about it. Um, and if I may just a few more points. Also, I brought into I again I was trying, I've seen some very important philosophers conflate the idea of the anima mundi and the noosphere. And the more I dug into that, it was very clear to me that we're talking about two different things here. And so I tried to make that very clear. I feel like one, obviously there overlap and all that, and there's no hard lines there, but um, to me, the anima mundi is very much related to soul and psyche, and the noosphere is very much related to mind. And obviously, Teilhard was deep into the heart and experiencing things from a very profound level that are connected to his psyche. But the manifestation of the noosphere, the mind sphere of the planet, is not always related to psyche. And so I tried to make that distinction very clearly. Um, so those are a couple ways I feel like I brought some ideas together in a new way. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer to your question.
That was a wonderful answer, Max. I agree with everything you said in terms of what you accomplished in the dissertation. Just a little note for further conversation on the self, no, just between you and I after the role of the self. I'd love to talk with you more about that. And also noosphere, anima mundi thing. I have a little reference I want to give you in relation to that. I have other questions, but I don't want to be uh, I don't want to be too greedy. So hopefully there'll be time for another round. And for now, I want to pass it on to Brian.
Thank you,
Brian,
Sean. Thank you, Sean. I feel like we should pass it on to Will. He's our outside guest. Make him feel at home.
happy to do that. This
Came
the
all the way from
Brian
Portugal.
always does this, but Will, if you're ready to go, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Brian, for treating me like the warmly welcomed guest. It's such a joy to be here and has been, as Sean said earlier, I feel the same. It's been a real privilege to serve on this committee and to be continuing my longstanding connection with CIIS. It's just a deep pleasure. I have Well, first of all, I just need to say, Max, wow, what a beautiful presentation of such an expansive topic. And you've done such a masterful job in 40 minutes of transmitting what the three of us on the committee have had the privilege of delving into deeply in the full depth of your dissertation. I also want to say how incredibly skillfully you have synthesized so many different ideas about the self, and you've really honored these different threads. And in particular, you've accurately summarized the key essence of so many of these different ideas across multiple fields that are related to, our concept of the self. So I just want to say, a deep bow to you and hats off for this job that you've done and the masterful dissertation that has resulted from it. It's very clear how deeply you've contemplated these things and how much it bears the imprint of your soul to bring this dissertation forward. So
Thank you.
I have a question of the first question I want to ask is, considering now with all that you've done, how does your concept of the cosmological self inform and transform our very concept of the human soul and in particular, the cultural soul of Western civilization. So it's kind of a broad question, but how do you see the contribution that you're making potentially making a transformative impact on our concept of the human soul and the cultural soul of the West?
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful question. Well, I can only say that I hope or aspire to do such a thing. But I guess what I can speak about it from my own experience first is what happened to me as I encountered these cosmological narratives. There's something about the transmission of knowledge itself, that there is an awakening in oneself. And yes, there are other practices, contemplative practices, meditation, physical practices, yoga. There's other ways of getting in touch. But for me, and I think for other scholars, there is something about knowledge itself that transforms your consciousness. And through this process, I felt myself being transformed time and time and time again. And so when I was coming from New York City, I was at Hunter College. I did exactly, Joel just said fifth element of hip hop. I was in the hip hop world in New York City, and the fifth element of hip hop is knowledge of self. And so I was pursuing knowledge of self, but I was doing it from a postmodern worldview. And I was from a sociological perspective and and questioning the power dynamics in society and social structures and diving deep into that. And then I just got my mind blown, to use a very technical term, by Rick and Brian and Sean and Joanna and Stan and all of this knowledge that I was learning. I felt it took me a while too. I think it took about a decade. Also with Jerry, with Bioneers, I felt like my worldview was literally being transformed. And I had to relearn everything I had learned on the East Coast about the nature of reality and who I am and my relationship to nature and my relationship to the women in my life and my relationship to children and my relationship just staring up at the cosmos. Like when I look up and I go out and look at the stars now, there is a luminosity that I experience. And I don't know if I would experience that without the knowledge that was transmitted from my beautiful teachers here. Um, so, so I would say that I would humbly say that my hope, to answer your question, is that somebody would read this text and it could be the beginning of their awakening towards an expanded self-awareness, and that they would go out into the desert and experience the cosmos firsthand, which I did in New Mexico for many years, and is life-changing. When you actually, in New York, you don't see the cosmos. You go out in the desert and you're like, I am living in this magnificent universe and something magical is happening here. I don't know exactly what. And so this dissertation is a transmission of knowledge that hopefully awakens one's mind, body, and soul to a deeper reality, expanded reality. So that's my hope.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful response. Thank you so much, Max. I think we should go to Brian, and if we have a chance for one more round, I'll have another question. But let's move to Brian.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, first of all, Will said all the things I was going to say. So it seems I shouldn't have let you go first, Will. But I just completely agree. It's just a magnificent dissertation. And the presentation, it was so clear, and it was just rolling out of you. And your warmth and your excitement was, we could all feel that in your voice. So it takes a lot of work, and you've done that. and you're just shining with it. The thing I was going to say that picks up on what Will was saying is that I think that you've brought together a number of different things, but in particular in PCC, like you say, evolutionary cosmology and archetypal cosmology. I when I was reading your dissertation, I thought, why didn't I think of that? And in particular, it was what you said about depth psychology. I mean, Rick has said these things to me. Probably, it took me listening to Rick for years, but I really got it reading your dissertation, namely that depth psychology is this amazing discovery that is something like, in magnitude, the discovery of the evolution of the universe. And I was since I was a young person, I was so wrapped up in trying to take in the evolutionary cosmology. I didn't have any spare neurons to think about archetypal cosmology, really. I mean, but you've done that, and it's to me, that's the really the original contribution in a big way that you have really. Why would we? The scientists that are thrilled about the discovery of the evolution of the evolutionary cosmology, they're like me, are not going to have much to say about depth psychology, and to a certain extent, it's vice versa as well. I remember one time at a conference, I went first, and James Hillman followed, and he said, "I don't care about the Big Bang. I don't give a hill of beans about the Big Bang. In fact, I care more about beans than the Big Bang," which was a riot. I loved it. But you can see my point. But you've brought these two together, and it's fantastic. Really. And also it was very clear to me about halfway through, and I think in our correspondence, I'm pretty sure I told you this, that as I was reading, our own archetypal relationship was transforming. I was teacher, you were student, and the more I read, you became teacher and I became student. And so I will be returning to your work to sort out things that you've made clear that way. So what I wanted to do is I have a lot of these phrases and terms that we're using are somewhat slippery because we're in a new domain of understanding. And I like the way you said, Anima Mundi, awesome idea, noosphere, awesome. They are distinct, and exactly the ways in which they're different. It's very important for us to. So what I want to do, Max, I want you to define. I have like 3 or 4 terms right now. Yeah. Define them not in a huge analytical way, but just to separate them from each other. And so I'm going to go through them, but let me just give you all of them all at once, and then I'll come back. Okay. Yep. So I have, I only have 4. I have 4. Okay. A cosmological self, planetary mind, planetary consciousness, and global consciousness. Cosmological self, planetary mind, planetary consciousness, and global consciousness. These are all related, and I want to know how you distinguish them in your own thinking.
Well, I don't. Yeah. You said global mind. Did I use global mind?
No, global consciousness.
Global consciousness. Did I use that term? I don't think I used that term, but I can distinguish it for you.
Yeah. Most likely you didn't. My eyesight is going. I'm getting older.
No, but I can clear this up for you because this is really important.
Yeah.
This is a great question, Brian,
Oh, thank you.
and such an honor to be here with you, as always. Um, so the cosmological self, I was re-listening to your Powers of the Universe, and it's not much different than the way you just talk about a cosmological being. So cosmological self, I see every being as a cosmological self, no matter where they are in their development. So every human, every life, every organism, even organisms that are potentially out in space that are alive, are the cosmological self. Now, we're talking specifically, I focus specifically on this dissertation on the human because it was
Yeah.
too broad to get into animals and other species, although I did bring in our connection to them. So for me, we're talking about every human emerges out of cosmic evolution. So that's pretty much scientifically people agree on that. What we don't agree on is the interiority part, but we do agree relatively that all the beings emerge out of cosmic evolution, out of the Earth's evolution. But a cosmological self, because of this notion of what a self is about self, has to do with self-reflective consciousness. So in selves are narratives, and I got into this in chapter 2. A self is a narrative of who we are, right? And I showed how the evolution of consciousness, those narratives have changed over time. And so a cosmological self is someone, let's say a cosmological being is just someone in the universe. A cosmological self is someone who is aware that they are part of the evolution of the universe, of the earth. And I brought in this other dimension from archetypal cosmology that not only are they aware of that reality, and you and Barry and Tara do an amazing job of bringing human creativity and consciousness as part of that evolution, which I love. But the what I love about archetypal cosmology and the investigation into the unconscious and the whole depth psychological tradition is that there is such a rich understanding of the archetypal dynamics of the interiority of the human. It's amazing how much we know about the interiority, the dynamics. In internal family systems, they talk about parts. This is an accepted term now. A lot of people go to these things. We have subpersonalities or different parts that we're dealing with, these coax systems, these complexes. But what archetypal cosmology and the depth psychological tradition really get at is these archetypal patterns that are observable throughout history, throughout time, and across cultures. So there's some type of structuring, just the same way as mathematical physics has been able to structure galaxies and understand the mathematical equations of the physical universe, and biology has mapped the understanding of how biology works. Depth psychology has done, in my opinion, a successful job at mapping the archetypal dynamics of the unconscious. And so a cosmological self has an awareness of both the inner and outer realities that they're coexisting in. So I could go on, but
That's great. No, that's great. Yeah.
okay. So this distinction between planetary mind and planetary consciousness is an important one because I have one chapter on planetary mind and I have one chapter on planetary consciousness. And so what happened was, as I was writing about the planetary mind, the noosphere, which I believe is a real thing, it's clear as day, it's observable, it's testable, it's right there. AI is a manifestation of it. The whole technological revolution is a manifestation of it. Social media, the internet, all these things, which you you beautifully go over in your video series. What happened was along that journey, I realized, wait a minute, there's a distinction between a planetary mind and a planetary consciousness, because and Sean makes this distinction in his book Coming Home. And that was the big revelation. That was kind of the third stream that came in the end and really helped me like pull it all together. Was Sean's work about the evolution of consciousness allowed me to pull this all together and see that there is an unfolding. And even though the planetary mind is live and well, and we're all afraid that it's going to destroy the earth and destroy each other, and there's a lot of unconscious behavior going on with the planetary mind. And so the planetary mind is real, and there is a lot of power, extreme superpower to it. But there's a lot of unconsciousness going on in that activity. And so I had and so I got the term planetary consciousness from Edgar Morin and Sean's work. And what I like that term. Other people I played, other people use terms eco consciousness or Gaian consciousness. I liked planetary consciousness because it situates, you're not just on the earth, but you're on a planet in space, right? So I like this term planetary. Edgar Morin makes a beautiful distinction of this between the mind and consciousness. And what's his book, Sean?
Homeland Earth.
Homeland Earth. He was the first person that I saw make a hard distinction between the two, and I thought, this is brilliant. This is exactly what I'm trying to get at. And he says, what we're witnessing in the 20th century is people interfaith movements coming together, realizing that we need to come together. People from all different backgrounds coming together saying, we need to come together around ecology. And I go over all this in great detail, but a planetary consciousness is an awareness of the Earth, all the living system of Earth that Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock displayed so amazingly. But it's not just the exterior parts, it's also the interior parts. And Barry and others have shown how religions are coming. Like Barry started to notice that his students at Fordham were informed by Taoist, Vedic, yogic, Buddhist, all this philosophy. And he was like, wait a minute, there's a convergence happening with all these ancient wisdom traditions. And he and what's his name? They're talking about the second axial age.
You were cousins, yeah.
Cousins. They're putting forth the second axial age when all these wisdom traditions that emerged, a lot of them, not all of them, emerged in the first axial age, are now converging as a planetary organism. And then I brought in this additional element because of archetypal cosmology of the integration of the self and Jung's idea of the archetype of the self, where even though there's a distinction between the unconscious and conscious and all these archetypal dimensions of the unconscious, the archetype of the self represents the wholeness of all of it together. And then I take it a step further and say, it's not just the wholeness of everything interior, but it's the wholeness of everything interior and everything on the planet. And so my hope, and Sean, nails this in his book. He says, and maybe it's wishful thinking, but we do see glimmers of it. You do see communities where they are international, they are gender balanced, they are interfaith. And that, believe it or not, that's a new thing in the 20th century. That wasn't really happening at a global scale like that before the 20th century. So a planetary consciousness in the fullest picture is all of those, is a cosmological self as it's moving along its evolution, is reaching this point where me as an individual, somehow, I don't know how, but somehow I can grok all of that information and all these different dynamics in my consciousness and be part of and participate in all of those dynamics. I don't think I used the word global consciousness, and I intentionally didn't use that term.
Great, great. No, wonderful, Max. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great.
I hope that's, I could go on and on, but I hope that's
Perfect. Just very helpful. Clarifies completely. I love it. And I know Sean wanted to have a second round.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can we do that? Well, I guess
Sure.
it's up
Yeah.
up to me to decide, right? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, well, one question I was going to ask, you've sort of answered it actually, and that is the distinction between cosmological and planetary. So it's a cosmological self, but you end with toward a planetary consciousness. So there's cosmological self and planetary consciousness. And earlier you talked about the successive broadening or widening of consciousness, from individual to family to, ethnicities to nation state to the planet, and then you suggest to the cosmos as a whole, presumably mediated by our solar system and particularly through archetypal cosmology and the role of the planets. So I guess maybe I will ask this question then, just say a little bit more. Is it really just a question of broadening or widening? You and if so, what is to be gained by with the widest possible, cosmological vision? I sort of got that with your description of being under the stars in the Southwest, which I said, oh yeah, I get it. I remember that. And though, there's something distinctive about planetary.
Mhm.
And what is that? So what is the planetary just a step along the way to cosmological? So is planetary consciousness, if the trajectory is progressive widening, is the planetary just a midway point to cosmological, or is there something qualitatively distinct and different about planetary?
Yeah, great question. Will Keeping and me have been talking about this to a great extent, and I made some adjustments based on his questioning. So the cosmological self is a self-awareness that you are part of this evolutionary process. Now, you could be anywhere along the way. What I think is happening and what you've put forth in your book and others is that what's emerging is a planetary civilization. And before we can get to a planetary civilization, I think it's not just a broadening of awareness, it's actually an integration of all these elements of the earth, an acceptance of all these elements of the earth, the different traditions, of different people, different cultures of nature. And it's an integration. And I believe that we are headed towards a place where every human being will have a planetary consciousness. Bill Thompson actually gave me a great way to look at this, because at first I was thinking, well, this is weird because is this just another form of globalization or like colonialism, or some type of planetary civilization is going to be this big government totalitarian state that we're all part of? And that didn't feel good. But Bill Thompson's brilliant, and he says it's a planetary consciousness within, that each individual will be able to hold all these pieces within their own being, and that it's actually he thinks that these little small communities that think global or cosmic but act local will be the next stage past industrial civilization. And I actually think he's right, because you're seeing that with transition town movements. The more that there's disruption of globalization because of political issues or climate change and ecological issues, I do think that we are going to be moving back towards small communities, and those small communities are interconnected to all the other small communities through the internet, through communication, and all these little small communities hold within themselves a planetary consciousness. They're aware of the ecology of the Earth. They're aware of our place in the universe. One other point, one other question you asked was about is planetary consciousness a step along the way? And me and Will talked about this. I think absolutely it is. I think it is the next phase of evolution of consciousness. It might take 500 years. It's going to take some time. And beyond that is, yes, a cosmic consciousness. We're going to be, who knows what's going to be emerging in the centuries to come as far as our understanding of other planets and other life forms. I mean, we've already discovered over 5,000 Earth-like planets, inhabitable zones. Like it just keeps evolving. And so I do think that is the next stage, a cosmic consciousness. But I felt like trying to make that point in this dissertation was a bridge too far. And I think our first mission is to bring about an awakening of planetary consciousness within. Is that sufficient? And Will, you could jump in here because I know we talked about this if you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you, Max. You know that I'm in total agreement with you about
But
that.
does that
Yeah,
answer your question?
it's good enough for now, more than good enough. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll pass it on to Will.
Thank you, Sean. So I think it's clear that, but just to make it state the obvious as a preface to my question, I have no major objections or any key unresolved questions. And the few little issues that I raised in reading your dissertation, you responded to so beautifully. I do want to say, because Brian said so beautifully, the teacher-student roles reversed, and Brian felt like he was being the student. And I just want to say, I think your pedagogical style that you're exhibiting today is really gracious and masterful. And your listening and your responses and crafting cogent responses in the moment is really a joy to witness. So now I do want to imagine for a moment, because this will happen at some point, especially in your scholarly career as you go out. There will be some who will take a challenging stance to what you're saying. So let's imagine for a moment that we had such a person here on this, either the dissertation committee or the audience. Just hypothetically, let's take a Steven Pinker, for example, who basically would agree actually with much of the symptoms that you are speaking to in terms of the degradation and the challenges that humanity is facing. And again, you don't have to have read his work. I'm just using him as a possible example.
I did cite him a lot, though, by the way.
Right. And he has, his various books. But one of them, Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress, which Bill Gates described as my new favorite book of all time. I'm bringing this out because basically what I think he's saying, and if it, it's the essence of what you're doing is all kind of either irrelevant or just unnecessary. What we need to do is return to the ideals of the Enlightenment. And of course, as we see now, reason and science are being thrown out the window at high levels in our societies. Science itself is being attacked even in shocking ways. And so that case could even be amplified from when this book came out. I think that was 2018 or something when that book came out. But you could encounter that kind of challenge. And I wonder how you would respond to, we don't need all this. What we need is to go back to the foundations of the Enlightenment. And, reason and science will see us through and will bring forth the progress that we need. So, cosmological self, it's like, what does that have to do with anything? Let's go back to the ideals of the foundation of Western civilization and honor them truly. I'm just curious, and that's all we need. That's the solution in a sense. And I'm just curious what your response would be to a question like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm well aware that I will, as I step out into the broader world, have a lot of adversaries. What I would say to Steven Pinker is, first, I would tell him that I cited his work, and second, I would tell him that Gebser actually identified this in his book, The Ever-Present Origin, and he talked about the evolution of consciousness. And what he's saying is that the next stage is integral consciousness. And he specifically says what we're going to see along the way, because everyone's going to resist that push, is a reversion to the old systems. So Pinker wants to go back to the Enlightenment. Great. Tucker Carlson wants to go back to Christianity. Great. A lot of Islamic people want to go back to Islam. Everyone's going back. Well, we can't move forward. Things are falling apart. There's no answers. Let's go back to an old system. And Gebser points this out. He kind of identifies that this is going to happen along the way. And I think it's just a blip in time. They're going to quickly realize that you can't go back. You can only go forward, because the whole universe is going forward, unless there's some theoretical model I'm not aware of that goes back. We're going forward. And even though they all have great resistance, whether it's the scientists or Christians or communists or capitalists, we just need to go back to the way it was, or MAGA. We're only going forward. And so the more they resist the integral consciousness that is emerging on this earth, the more we will fight, the more we will have division. And I am going to stand on the side firmly of the world coming together and finding communion in our differences and figuring out how to coexist with a living earth, so that not just humans, but all of life on earth can not just survive, but thrive. And if Steven Pinker and others don't like that, I'm okay with it, honestly.
Beautiful response. Thank you. That's fabulous. And the second part of my question, or second question, but it's really related to the going forward. There's a conference in April that's being put on by the Galileo Commission of the Scientific and Medical Network. And the title is The Coming Age of Enheartenment, Love as an Alchemy of Transformation. And I just wonder if you could speak to the epistemology, what I sometimes like to call the epistemology of the heart, and how that has a bearing here in terms of the cosmological self. I'm thinking also, for example, Hillman, who said, image is the thought of the heart.
Yeah.
And the heart has he's really speaking to the fact that the heart has its own epistemological process and method in which images are revealed, and behind each image is another image. And this is, addressed by the mystical traditions in different ways. But I wonder if you could speak to the heart as an instrument of perception. And I mean, I see it as spiritual perception, but I just wonder if you could speak the role of the heart in this unfolding awakening to cosmological identity and self.
Yeah, great question. We've been having, for everyone else, Will and I have been having ongoing discussions about epistemology of the heart. And for me personally, doing the gender equity and reconciliation work in the workshops has been one of the practices that has moved me more into the heart and more into relating and having empathy for others. Um, I think well, one, empathy is the key here. Empathy does not come from the mind. Empathy comes from the heart, the physiological body. And in order to really empathize with someone else, you have to feel their feelings. And there's especially for males, I'll speak for myself, it's really hard. So, we get shut down, we got a lot of armor. We don't want to open up to feelings because it's very vulnerable. And being vulnerable is very dangerous. But as one can open up to feel their deepest grief, I mean, Joanna talks about this, good grief. How do we live in a place where we're in the sixth mass extinction and go forward with inspiration and hope and love with all of this suffering? We have to feel that at the deepest level. And I think this relates to the epistemology of the heart. It took me 4 years, me personally, it took me 4 years in therapy to get in touch with my grief. I didn't want to look at it. And so I think there's certain practices, and I don't know. I think this what you're talking about is more. We can talk about it philosophically, but I do think that what you're talking about has more to do with direct experience. So whether it's workshops with Jerry or the work that reconnects, these practice or breath work, these practices get us in touch with our heart and with our feelings that we have shut down in the modern world, in the Western world, and in other societies too. Um, so see, empathy, and I wanted to get more into this whole idea of empathy, but I couldn't put everything in there. Um, Empathy is what allows you to be connected to others and what allows you to be connected to the earth. Like if I can cry for the destruction of a species or an ecosystem, then I am viscerally connected with it. If I can cry for the pain of my wife, I am viscerally connected to her. I can intellectualize it, I can think about it, I can analyze it, I can rationalize it, but it doesn't feel connected. And so I think the epistemology of the heart, and I'm so excited with what you're doing and want to learn so much more about it. I think it is essential to this development towards a planetary consciousness. And there are places in the text where I allude to great thinkers and certain people speaking to that exact point. Teilhard, all his revelations, this blew my mind. His book Heart of the Matter, I'm reading it, and he's in the trenches in World War I, and he's seeing death, and his heart explodes into a universal consciousness. In the face of death is what opened him up to the it's when he said he had the first idea of the noosphere was in the trenches in the midst of all this death and destruction. And so you see Teilhard talking about the heart, you see Barry talking about it, you see Joanna talking about it, obviously you're talking about it. I quote Nina Simon saying that all of this knowledge and information and technology, renewable energy, all this stuff is going to do nothing if we don't open our hearts. Edgar Morin says it. I quote him in the final chapter. So there's all these places where I allude to, like, it takes more than the mind. It takes more than analytical thinking. It takes more than the rational mind to get to this deeper place of interconnection. It's going to take our hearts, our bodies. It's going to take us suffering. Compassion means to suffer with. I have to suffer with the loss. When you go through death, like when my mother passed, you feel that at a deep level. And maybe that's a maturity thing through life, but you start to realize how important life is. as I'm getting to midlife, I'm like, wow, life is really important. And I want to protect life. I want to protect, the biosphere. I want to be on team life. And I want to open my heart as deeply as I can and be as vulnerable as I can. And I think there's a cautionary tale there. As we know in the Jerry community, there's a lot of places in this world are not safe to open your heart. And so you gotta be wise and know who can you open your heart with? Who can you share your deepest feelings with? And don't do it with people who are gonna stomp on you or kill your dream. I always say don't tell your dreams to dream killers. Why would you do that? So you have to have an awareness of self to know when it's safe. Jerry creates a safe container. People just want to open their hearts, but they need a safe container. They need some rules. They need some guidelines. Um, so I'm super excited about this. This is why I did the Jerry training. I'm super excited about working with the Jerry community at a deeper level, and deepening my heart and opening my heart to all of the suffering in the world, because that's the only way I'm going to feel alive.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Max.
Beautifully spoken.
Well,
It's a great transition point.
yeah, Brian, you have the last question here.
No, I mean, I'm so satisfied, Sean.
Okay.
So deeply
All right.
satisfied. So
All right.
let us.
Well, so I mean, yeah, I am satisfied. If we had infinite time, I'd love to carry on the conversation, but I do want to be respectful of the time we had allotted. So at this point, let me see. I wonder if I can create I'm not sure how to do this.
That's done, Sean. Hi,
Oh,
it's
good.
V. Yeah,
Can you create a room? Thank you, V, for
Yeah.
the three of us.
absolutely. I'm going to start the dissertation committee room. Everybody else stays put. Dissertation committee will get a notification to go to a separate breakout room. When you're ready, come back.
Great.
In the
And in the meantime,
meantime,
Max.
Matt Siegel will help us facilitate.
Great. Thank you, V.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Matt.
Thank you.
Matt, I'm wondering, is it okay if I call on people to answer questions?
Very happy for you to do so, Max. Please go ahead.
Thanks. So now we're going to open it up to questions. So if anyone has questions, you can raise your hand in a little box. I see Candace has a question. We can start with Candace.
Max, thank you so much. What an inspiration for a doctoral student like myself. So you mentioned fairly early on the word maturity, and I was really, and then you mentioned almost at the end just now that it might take 500 years. I know Jung mentioned 300 years. I'm really interested in who you read that had a really long view of this maturation process. And also, you mentioned that now this, developing this cosmological self is within our agency. But I'm curious, it does seem that many people individuals have a lot of, maturational steps between here and there. I just wondered if you could address sort of the process of maturation as it relates to this process that's happening on the planet.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Candace. I think, everyone is where they're at. And so I think part of a sensitivity is when we engage with people in dialogue is understanding where they're at. You can't get them from A to Z. If you want to help awaken or teach, you got to go from A to B to C to D. It's a stepping process. And our professors in PCC do it so well, kind of walking us through these steps, because the process of awakening is a step-by-step process, and all great initiate traditions know this. Every initiate tradition knows this. You can't have the deepest teaching. You have to be an apprentice first, and you have to move on to the different steps. I threw out 500 years. I don't think it will take that long. Um, Bill Thompson says that if you look at these different stages of the evolution of consciousness, they're shorter and shorter in time scales. And so maybe it would take, the modern period. Some people say it's been 500 years, so maybe the next move is shorter. I'm definitely open to that. And I guess part of my learning has been, and this is part of working on changing the gods, was change happens intergenerationally. And so it's hard to see it in a lifespan. We think, oh, nothing ever changes. But if you start to look at the intergenerational change as an evolutionary arc, you see it clear as day. And the maturation process is going to be different for different cultures. It's going to be different for different individuals. And honestly, Candace, the most important thing is your maturation process. And where are you at in your evolution? And where are you trying to go with your evolution of consciousness? And that process will inspire those around you. You don't even necessarily have to tell them. But yeah, that's some of my thoughts about the maturation process. I hope that's helpful. We can talk more about it. Where are you? Where'd you go?
Thank you. I'm here. I also just want to thank you for pointing out that for you in your life, knowledge has been an access to awakening, because I really have felt the same. And I love to share that concept. Our culture has turned away from knowledge in some ways, but I think the kind of knowledge we receive at PCC is an opening, is a big opening. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, thank you. I saw Annette Williams. Did you have your hand up? No? Let me see.
No, ma'am, this is a congratulatory
Oh,
word, and the synthesis. I was thinking of what we've shared, the many paths that you have walked, the many people you've encountered, the various cultures, and how you beautifully woven that together. And as part of your defense in this presentation, and how beautifully, as has already been said, you've presented this material.
thank you. All right, who's got the, let me see. Let's go with Somya Nabir. You have your hand up?
Hey, Max, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to, as has been reflected, to hold these two polls in PCC. So what came up for me, and I was really glad to hear you reference this, is like, what if planetary consciousness is like this big brother government system, right? And I was so glad to like hear you reference that. So, when I think of the need for boundaries, borders, and containment, two things come to mind. One is like colonization, which you were referencing, and the other
Yeah.
is like concentration, right? Like maybe like a teenager who needs to like lock himself in his room from his parents so that he can deepen into individuation, right? So I know that you're holding a lot of this, and that may be like an edge. Like, so as we go into planetary consciousness, what are some of the words you might offer to somebody for whom it might be overwhelming, right? And we have like Groff talks about spiritual emergencies where it's like suddenly you're in a cosmic consciousness. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts as a teacher, as someone who's going to be guiding people through this.
Yeah, good question. Short answer is it all comes down to personal choice. And this is why I end the whole thing, an epilogue after all this 450 pages, I end it with personal choice, because if people aren't choosing this, it's not important. Like if this is being forced on people, it's not an awakening of consciousness. It's a totalitarian regime. And so everyone can choose to participate in this. If teenagers or older folks want to sequester themselves in isolation, they have that choice, and I believe firmly in freedom to choose. And it can't be forced. And honestly, your message, and Rick and Brian and others do this so skillfully, is and Jerry too, it's all about the invitation. Everyone in the Jerry workshop is invited to participate. At any point, they can stop. They can say, I don't want to do this activity. That's always an option. And because they say that, everyone participates in everything. It's just they're like, oh, I have the option to sit out if I want to. Cool, I'll do it. But nobody wants to be forced. Nobody wants to be coerced. And so this has to be a personal choice. So that's my initial thought. And I'm going to jump to someone else just because we're running on time. But thank you for that question. Miko, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So beautiful to hear your dissertation and all the work that you've been doing, and to feel this culmination that's happened over many years and through your own personal growth. And you mentioned the like narrative aspect of having a cosmological self, like moving towards a cosmological self through narrative, I think is what you were speaking to. And I'm curious, you also spoke to like that ultimately it's like an awareness, it's an awakening that happens, like awakening to a cosmological self, that you also seem to speak to in your own personal experience. And I'm wondering, is there a point where that narrative drops and becomes a more direct experience? Is that part of the actual like full awakening of the cosmological self, or how does the narrative fit into that, from how you're seeing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So according to cognitive psychologists, narratives are created. Humans create narratives. And so what I tried to do was create a narrative that matched the phenomenal world. That was my purpose. So some narratives are like, they don't match your lived experience. So every step of the way, I was checking in with myself, obviously about how I experience reality, but also how I hear my friends and family experience reality, other anecdotal accounts of how other people experience reality. And I was making sure that I was only including ideas or narratives that matched experience. And this is the big thing about phenomenology. And I learned so much from Don Johnson, which I don't know if he's here, but that had a big effect. I mean, I know Jung was very, although he didn't always do it, he always reiterated that he was trying to match his theories with experience. And so I really took that to heart, the whole philosophy of phenomenology, and I actually wanted to write a whole thing about it, but it was getting too big and too bulky. But yeah, to me, that's super important, is do our narratives match our lived experience? And for me, if they don't, I want those two things to align. So hope that's helpful.
Yeah, could I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Are you also trying or attempting to create a narrative that leads to a more direct experience, if that makes sense, if you get what I'm saying there?
Am I trying to construct a narrative?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
With
mean, that's what this dissertation is.
yeah.
It's my attempt at creating a self-narrative that matches the phenomenal world and the lived experience. It's my attempt. There's others. Other people might do it differently. I'm not saying this is the only way. It's just one way.
It's
Max,
beautiful.
the dissertation committee is back.
Okay, and when they're done, we can jump back to other questions if people want to hold on. But if you have to go, that's okay too. Because I do want to get to Natalie and Mike and Lotto. Thank you, V.
Yes, thank you, V. Yeah, sorry to interrupt the flow, but I'm glad to know that it can continue if Max and whoever else is available to continue. But I wanted to relay the judgment of the committee, and I hope. Oh, there is, well, Will's still there. Okay, I don't see Brian, but there were two buttons we could have pushed, and I almost pushed leave the meeting, but I pushed leave the meeting, the breakout room. So maybe Brian pushed the wrong button.
No,
Are you
John,
there?
I'm here.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Okay, thank you. Now I see you. All right. So we deliberated on two things, the dissertation and today's defense. On the matter of the dissertation, we all agreed that unless something unexpected should turn up of a very minor nature, we have absolutely no revisions that we consider to be necessary at this point. In the matter of the defense, we were also in complete agreement that Max demonstrated utter command of his material and also responded with mastery and aplomb to very, challenging, complex questions, and in so doing, demonstrated that he, in fact, is a doctor. So congratulations, Dr. Max.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Congratulations, Dr.
Congratulations.
Thank
Whoop,
you. Thank you.
Doctor!
All right.
whoop.
Oh, so great to see everyone here. So beautiful.
Congratulations,
Okay.
Matt.
Ashe.
Yeah, speech.
So many beautiful people here from so many different parts of my
Blessings,
life.
blessings, blessings.
Blessings, peace, and love. New York, California. Everybody's here.
Can I say one thing here, Max? We are also, and I'm sure anybody who's been with PCC will feel this as well, but like you're a tree planted in the PCC garden and sort of grew slowly, but you've become this magnificent oak with a proliferation of acorns just dropping that so many people can feed on, the rest of the community. And so, yeah, you've just, we are so delighted and proud that our community could have been the garden within which such a beautiful and fruitful tree could grow and come to fruition. So.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, and thank you to all my teachers who are here, who aren't even on the committee, and the whole PCC community and the greater community, Bioneers, Jerry, everybody. I've learned so much, and I am so indebted to all of you for your knowledge and wisdom, understanding, and compassion as I matured. Candace, I had a lot of maturing to do along the way, and here we are. So thank you all.
Oh, no, I wasn't here. Obviously, I don't know whether Rick and Brian have said anything, but if not, I would love. You did?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, well, yeah, I would love to give the chance because Rick, well, for many reasons, obviously the founder of the program, but Rick has also been present as with the evolution and writing of the dissertation in a very meaningful way, and Robert also has been part of this process. So I would love to give the two of you a chance to say something if you would like.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, shall I jump in and then hand it over to you, Robert? I just will, and then Max, can't praise you enough. I mean, so proud of what you have done with the dissertation, with your defense today. you just put it all together, and each component of what you brought together, you went into such depth with, so that you just were such an exemplar of the kind of passionate inquiry and keeping the larger vision in mind all the time. I felt like you brought the basically everything in our multidisciplinary PCC program into your dissertation and integrated it. And you also shone a light back on it, on the program and on our learning community, because we're, as you know as well as any of us, we're all in this together. And you also have a big heart. And there's just a way I felt in which this was not only a scholarly treatise, it was also a kind of love poem, your dissertation, a love poem to the subjects of your dissertation, the cosmos, the earth, the human community, the whole evolutionary process, the deep psyche. And it was also a kind of love poem to your teachers and to our program, our community, and yeah, such a tremendous day. I feel like a decade and a half of a long, profound journey that you've been on has come to a glorious climax here, and I'm privileged to be witnessing it and applauding it. So, from my
Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
Robert, would you like
Like
to say
to-
something?
Robert,
After Robert, I'd love to have Tish is there too.
okay,
You
great.
just need to unmute yourself if you want to say anything.
Only to repeat everything that Rick just said. It was exactly what I was going to say. That, oh, how could anybody do anything so brilliant, so careful, so intellectually precise with such empathy? That's so inviting, so reassuring, and oh, it was a very beautiful 2 hours, Max. Thank you. I'll be coming back to the dissertation, and I hope I will find there some of this warmth and kindness that you were exhibiting in your conversation today. Thank you, thank you. You're a wonderful person.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
Max,
Yes, Tish.
you can hear me, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, baby, it's really sweet, for you to break it all down and make it clear for the average person to be able to understand what you were talking about. Okay, be real clear that we can lift this material and talk to anybody about it. Okay, and I really am grateful that early on in your presentation you acknowledged Ubuntu and Ifa, because a lot of times in intellectual discourse, people will cite Buddhism, they'll cite Christianity, they'll cite even Native American, and the African contribution is either left out or tagged on, like sprinkles on a birthday cake rather than flour. But you made it part of the flour, and you made the cake edible, and you made it pretty. And I really, really am grateful. I've got enough notes here that with your permission, I would like to be able to use some of your words and phrasings in work that I've been working on.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Bless you, Tish. Thank you for being here.
Ashe.
Ashe.